Point Cruise, Guadalcanal, 1943. On. Point Cruise, Guadalcanal, 1943. On the sand at low tide lies 29.5 feet of steel, wider around than a man's outstretched arms, its nose crushed into black coral, its tail still trailing 60 feet of cable it tore loose from a Japanese destroyer more than a mile offshore. No American has ever had one of these intact. Every torpedo the US Navy has pulled out of a sunk hull before this has been in pieces, warped by the explosion that killed the men standing near it. This one didn't explode. It ran its full course, missed, and beached itself whole. Inside its midsection sits a tank of compressed gas that, when the divers finally cut into it weeks later, will register a working pressure of 225 atmospheres, more than 3 times what any American torpedo engineer has ever put inside a steel cylinder meant to survive a warship's gun deck. That single number will force the US Navy to admit that for 18 months it has been losing cruisers to a weapon it did not believe was physically possible to build. The recovery itself takes 4 men and a rope. Salvage divers from the Naval Advance Base at Guadalcanal wade out at low tide, secure a cable around the torpedo's midsection, and drag it up the beach with a Marine Corps tractor. Nobody on the beach knows what they're looking at yet. To them, it's scrap, a torpedo casing, corroded, half-buried, one more piece of Japanese junk to catalogue and forget. It's loaded onto a flatbed and shipped to the nearest ordnance depot, and from there, crated to the Naval Proving Ground at Dahlgren, Virginia, where men whose entire job is understanding what makes enemy weapons work are waiting for something exactly like this. Before the tank, before the engine, before any of it, there's the size problem, and it's the first thing that stops the inspection team cold. American torpedoes run 21 inches in diameter. This one measures 24. That's not a small difference. It's a completely different design philosophy, and it means every assumption Bureau of Ordnance planners have made about how far a Japanese torpedo can travel and how much explosive it can carry has been wrong by a wide margin. One officer on the inspection team, looking at the tape measure against the hull, says out loud what the room is already thinking. If this thing is 3 inches wider than ours across its whole length, it isn't carrying 3 inches more air. It's carrying 3 inches more of something that lets it go farther, hit harder, and never leave a wake anyone can spot in time to turn the ship. Here's the thing worth pausing on. While all this is happening at Dahlgren, American destroyer crews out in the Solomons are still writing after-action reports blaming submarines for hits that came from surface ships 11 miles away. Nobody in the fleet has connected those reports to this beached hulk yet. That gap between what's sitting on a workbench in Virginia and what sailors are dying from in the South Pacific is the entire reason this examination matters, and it's worth remembering that gap every time the team opens another panel. If you're the kind of person who wants the real story behind the machines that decided these battles, not the version with the serial numbers filed off, this is exactly the kind of history this channel exists to dig up. Stick around, there's more of it every week. They start with the engine bay, and the first thing that comes apart is the fuel system. Standard kerosene. Nothing unusual, the same distillate any wet heater torpedo in any Navy burns. That's not the discovery. The discovery is what's feeding the kerosene, its oxidizer. American and British torpedoes of this era run on compressed air. Roughly 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. The same mix you're breathing right now, just squeezed into a tank. It works, but it's inefficient, because 3/4 of every tankful is inert gas doing nothing but taking up space and weight that could otherwise be fuel or range. When the inspection team traces the line back from the combustion chamber to the tank behind it, the gauge reading and the tank markings tell them this isn't air. It's oxygen. Pure oxygen, or as close to pure as 1943 industrial gas separation can produce. One engineer sits back from the workbench and says nothing for close to a minute. Because if the Japanese have solved the problem of running an engine on pure oxygen without it detonating in the tank, every performance number the US Navy has assumed for enemy torpedoes is now garbage. That pause matters because pure oxygen and hot metal are a combination that kills people. Compressed air is survivable if a valve sparks or a weld runs slightly too hot during manufacture. Nitrogen smothers most of that risk. Pure oxygen does the opposite. It turns a stray spark, a trace of oil on a fitting, or a burr on a valve seat into an explosion. The accepted engineering wisdom in every Allied torpedo shop is that you don't. Here's what it comes down to. A weld failed on a workbench in Virginia. That's all it was, physically. One seam, one gauge, one number. 225. But that number is the reason 11 Allied warships and thousands of sailors went down to torpedoes fired from ranges nobody thought existed. It's the reason submarine attack filled so many after-action reports that were never submarines at all. The failure of that weld didn't just end a pressure test. It ended a year and a half of the US Navy fighting blind against a weapon it had refused to believe could be built. The consequence moves fast once the report circulates. Bureau of Ordnance revises its threat assessments for Japanese surface torpedo attacks within weeks. Fleet doctrine on engagement ranges gets rewritten. Captains are briefed that standoff distances they trusted as safe are no longer safe at all. American torpedo development, which had been lagging badly against a weapon few believed existed, gets a new urgency behind pushing higher pressure, higher efficiency designs of its own. None of it undoes the ships already lost in the Solomons, but it changes how every cruiser captain in the Pacific reads a radar screen and a torpedo warning from that point forward, and it closes the gap between what Dahlgren knew and what the fleet knew, a gap that had already cost more ships than anyone wanted to count. Today, torpedoes recovered from this period sit in glass cases at naval museums. The oxygen tank usually displayed cut away so visitors can see the section that failed under test pressure. The numbers stenciled on a small placard most people walk past without reading. It looks like any other piece of rusted ordnance from a war 80 years gone. A long steel tube, faded paint, a warhead that will never detonate again. What the placard doesn't say is that this exact object, sitting quietly under museum lighting, is the reason the US Navy finally understood why it had been losing cruisers to torpedoes fired from ships its lookouts couldn't even see. The weld cracked at 225 atmospheres. Everything the Allies thought they knew about torpedo warfare cracked with it.